The first light of dawn had barely touched the fields when Ethan Carter heard the sound. A whimper, so faint it could have been the wind. But the wind didn't cry like that. It didn't sound like a child. He wiped the dirt from his hands and stepped closer to the rustling cornstalks, his breath catching in his throat. There, curled between the brittle husks, was a little girl. Her clothes were torn, her knees scraped raw, and her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto his. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Ethan knew that look. It was the same one he'd seen in the mirror after his wife died. The farm had been his refuge, the last piece of a life that hadn't yet crumbled. But in that moment, as he knelt beside the trembling girl, he felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't just a lost child. This was the beginning of something he couldn't undo, the kind of choice that would cost him everything. By sundown, the mayor would be at his door. By dawn, the military would surround his barn. And Ethan, he'd be standing in the middle of it all, wondering how saving one life could set an entire town on fire. The girl's fingers clutched the hem of his jacket, her knuckles white. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of what came next settling over him like the coming storm. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know the secrets she carried. But he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the debts this town owed, the lies it buried, and the reckoning that had finally found its way to his doorstep. And as the wind howled through the fields, Ethan made his decision. He picked her up. And just like that, the countdown began. Ethan carried the girl through the rows of corn, her small body shivering against his chest. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its porch light flickering like a dying ember. Inside, he wrapped her in the quilt his wife had stitched years ago, the one he couldn't bear to put away. The girl still hadn't spoken, but her eyes darted around the room, lingering on the photo of Ethan's late wife on the mantel. He warmed milk on the stove, the silence between them thick with unasked questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she alone in his field at daybreak? When he pressed gently, the girl flinched, her fingers tightening around the quilt. Ethan didn't push. Instead, he cleaned the dirt from her scraped knees, his calloused hands careful against her skin. It was only when he reached for the old rotary phone to call for help that she reacted, a sudden, desperate grab at his sleeve. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Just a single tear cutting through the grime on her cheek. That's when he saw the bruises on her wrists, faint but unmistakable. The kind that didn't come from falling. The phone rang unanswered. No social services, no sheriff, just the hollow dial tone mocking him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like a warning. Ethan glanced at the girl, Lily. He decided silently, because she was as fragile as one, and made a choice. He wouldn't hand her over to a system that left bruises on children, not until he knew who'd put them there. He banked the fire, locked the doors, and sat beside her at the kitchen table, sliding a plate of toast across the worn wood. "You're safe here," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Because safe places didn't exist in towns like his, not when the mayor owned the police, not when a child could vanish into the cracks, and certainly not when Ethan Carter, a man who'd spent his life avoiding trouble, was now squarely in its path. The girl nibbled at the toast, her eyes flicking to the window every few seconds, watching, waiting. Ethan didn't need to ask what she was afraid of. He could feel it coming too, the storm, the reckoning, the knock on the door that would change everything. And when it came, he'd be ready, or so he told himself. The pounding on the door came just past sunrise, 3 thunderous strikes that shook dust from the rafters. Ethan knew who it was before he even looked through the curtain. Mayor Richard Vaughn stood on the porch, his polished shoes gleaming against the warped wood, flanked by 2 deputies with hands resting on their holsters. The girl, Lily, flinched at the sound, her small body pressing into the shadowed corner of the kitchen like she wanted to disappear. Ethan wiped his palms on his overalls and forced himself to open the door. "Morning, Carter," Vaughn said, his smile all teeth and no warmth. "Heard you found yourself astray." His gaze slid past Ethan, hunting for Lily. The deputies shifted, boots scraping gravel. Ethan blocked the doorway, arms crossed. "She's not astray," he said, voice low. "She's a child, and she's scared." Vaughn's smile didn't waver. Scared of what exactly? The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Ethan hesitated too long. Vaughn's eyes lit up. "See, that's the thing. We got a report. Missing foster kid, and here you are hiding her like some kind of," he waved a hand, "hero." The word landed like a punch. One of the deputies coughed. Vaughn leaned in, his cologne thick enough to choke on. "Hand her over, Carter, unless you want me to start asking why you're so keen on keeping her." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew the threat underneath, the unpaid taxes, the looming foreclosure. Vaughn had been after his land for years. Lily was just the excuse he needed. Then a sound, a gasp. Lily stood in the hallway, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Before Ethan could stop her, she thrust it into Vaughn's hands. The mayor unfolded it, his smirk fading as he read the shaky child-sized letters. "He hurt me too." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vaughn laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Cute. But a kid's scribble won't save your farm, Carter, or her." He crumpled the note and dropped it. "Sun up tomorrow, be gone." The screen door slammed behind them. Ethan picked up the note, hands shaking. Lily stared at him, her eyes wide and wet. He didn't need to ask who he was. The bruises had already told him. Outside, gravel spat under tires as Vaughn's car peeled away. The farmhouse creaked in the sudden quiet. Ethan exhaled. They had one night to prove what Vaughn really was. One night before the bulldozers came. And Lily, she was the key, if only she could tell him what she knew. The barn smelled of hay and diesel, the only light coming from a single lantern swinging gently from the rafters. Ethan spread an old horse blanket over Lily's shoulders as she huddled between sacks of grain, her fingers tracing the faded embroidery along the edge, his wife's handiwork from better days. "We'll be safe here tonight," he lied, knowing Vaughn's men could kick in the doors at any moment. Lily didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a stub of pencil from her pocket and began sketching furiously on the back of a feed bag, her lines jagged but deliberate. Ethan watched as the drawing took shape. Vaughn's office, the mahogany desk, the landscape painting behind it, and then, hidden beneath the frame, a small black safe. His breath caught. "That where he keeps it?" he whispered. Lily nodded, shading in the combination dial with grim focus. The pieces clicked into place. Vaughn's sudden wealth, the land grabs, the way no one in town dared cross him. Whatever was in that safe wasn't just money. It was proof. Outside, the wind howled through the fields, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. Ethan checked his grandfather's shotgun, the weight familiar in his hands. He hadn't fired it in years, not since the accident that took his wife. But tonight he'd use it to buy time if he had to. Lily tugged his sleeve, pointing to the bottom of her drawing where she'd scribbled numbers, 12-24-08. A date, a combination. Her eyes begged him to understand. The first drops of rain hit the roof like warning shots. Ethan stuffed the drawing into his coat. "When they come," he said, kneeling to her level, "you run to the old Miller place. Don't look back." Lily shook her head violently, her small hands clutching his arm. For the first time she spoke, a single broken whisper. "Not without you." The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the barn walls. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, too close. Ethan pulled Lily to her feet. They weren't just hiding now. They were waiting, for Vaughn, for the storm, for the reckoning that had been coming since the moment this child stumbled into his field. And when it arrived, Ethan would face it with a shotgun in one hand and a little girl's secret in the other, ready to burn his whole world down if it meant saving hers. The first Jeep came roaring up the dirt road just as the sky bled pink with dawn. Ethan tensed, finger hovering near the shotgun's trigger, until he saw the star on the door. Not Vaughn's men. Army. 3 more Jeeps skidded to a halt, kicking up dust as soldiers in full gear fanned out across the yard. Lily let out a whimper, shrinking behind Ethan's legs. Then the passenger door of the lead Jeep swung open, and a man in a colonel's uniform stepped out. His face was all hard lines and shadowed hollows, but when his eyes landed on Lily, they shattered. "Lily girl," he choked out, his voice raw. The pencil dropped from Lily's fingers. She took one trembling step forward, then launched herself at the colonel with a sob that tore through the morning quiet. He caught her midair, crushing her to his chest like he could press her back into his ribs where she belonged. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into her hair. Over her shoulder, his gaze locked onto Ethan, part gratitude, part fury. "You kept her safe." It wasn't a question. Colonel Hayes, his name tag read, gently pried Lily loose just enough to show her the folded photo in his breast pocket. A woman with Lily's eyes smiled up from the faded image. "Your mom sent me," he said, thumb brushing Lily's cheek. "Took me 6 months to track you through that bastard shell companies." His head snapped up as tires screeched behind them. Vaughn's black SUV skidded into the yard, the mayor already shouting about trespassing, until he saw the soldiers, saw Hayes. His face went slack. Hayes handed Lily to a medic with a quiet order, then turned on Vaughn with the controlled burn of a man who'd waited too long for this moment. "Richard Vaughn," he said, too calm. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping of a military dependent, conspiracy, and about 12 other charges I don't have time to list." Vaughn backed up, sputtering about jurisdiction, until 2 soldiers yanked his arms behind his back. Hayes leaned in close. "That's safe behind your landscape painting. We cracked it 2 hours ago. Say hello to your whistleblower niece for me." Lily's small hand slipped into Ethan as they watched Vaughn get shoved into a Jeep. The colonel strode back, stopping toe-to-toe with Ethan. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Hayes extended his hand. "The VA's got a land grant with your name on it," he said. "Consider it payment for services rendered." Ethan shook it, too stunned to speak. Around them, soldiers fan out toward the barn, the house, securing what Vaughn had tried to take. The sun broke over the fields, painting the scene in gold. Lily squeezed Ethan's fingers, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he let himself believe it might really be over. Then the radio on Hayes' belt crackled to life. "Sir, you need to hear this." The colonel lifted it, and the tinny voice that came through turned Ethan's blood to ice. Vaughn wasn't working alone, and the man pulling his strings was still out there. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and bacon, real food, for the first time in months. Lily sat cross-legged on the counter, swinging her feet as she watched Ethan flip pancakes with his free hand, the other still wrapped in bandages from that night in the barn. Outside, Colonel Hayes barked orders at his men while they loaded the last of Vaughn's confiscated files into a military truck. Every so often, Lily would glance at the window, as if making sure her uncle was still there. Ethan slid a pancake onto her plate, drizzling it with honey from his own hives. Lily grinned and took a huge bite, syrup glistening on her chin. Then, without warning, she blurted out, "I like your farm." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Ethan froze, spatula midair. It was the first full sentence she'd ever spoken to him. Before he could respond, the screen door banged open and Hayes strode in, dropping a thick envelope on the table. "Deed cleared," he said. Vaughn's cronies folded faster than a bad poker hand, once we showed them the evidence. Lily scrambled down from the counter and ran to the old radio in the corner, twisting the dial until static gave way to music, a twangy country song Ethan's wife used to love. Hayes' stern expression softened as he watched her sway to the rhythm. "She's coming home with me," he said quietly. "But she asked, well, demanded, really, that we visit. Often." Ethan nodded, throat suddenly tight. Through the window, he could see the first green shoots pushing through the scorched earth, where Vaughn's bulldozers had tried to take root. The colonel cleared his throat. "There's something else." He pulled a dog tag from his pocket. "Ethan, from his own army days decades ago. Turns out saving a decorated officer's niece comes with benefits." He tapped the tag against the VA grant papers. "New roof, repaired equipment." And he nodded toward the barn, where two men in coveralls were installing a fresh coat of red paint. "Seems the whole town suddenly remembers how much they owe you." Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her small hand sticky with syrup. "Can we see the lambs now?" she asked, eyes bright. Ethan scooped her up, settling her on his hip like he'd done 100 times before, though it still sent a pang through his chest. As they stepped onto the porch, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." And there in the golden light, with the farm humming back to life around them and the weight of the past finally lifting, Ethan Carter realized something extraordinary. This wasn't just an ending. It was the first page of a story he'd thought was long since finished. The screen door creaked shut behind them as they walked toward the pasture, Lily's laughter mixing with the bleating of newborn lambs, a sound he hadn't heard in years, and one he'd never take for granted again. The last embers of sunset painted the farmhouse windows gold as Ethan leaned against the porch railing, watching Lily chase fireflies through the tall grass. Colonel Hayes stood beside him, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, the same one Ethan's wife had always used for guests. "She's different here," Hayes murmured, nodding toward Lily's carefree silhouette darting through the twilight. "Like she remembers how to be a kid again." A pause. "You did that." Ethan swallowed hard, focusing on the weight of the repaired deed in his back pocket. Inside, the radio crackled with the evening news, another update on Vaughn's trial, another story about corruption crumbling. Lily's laughter floated through the screen door, mingling with the distant bleat of sheep. Hayes set down his mug with finality. "We ship out at 600, he said, "but we'll be back next month. She's already packed her crayons to draw you more blueprints." His mouth quirked. "Says you'll need them for the new barn." Ethan opened his mouth to reply when Lily came barreling up the steps, her palms cupped around something precious. "Look." She uncurled her fingers to reveal a firefly, its faint glow pulsing against her skin. "It's like the lantern in the barn that night," she whispered, "but happier." The insect took flight, joining the constellation of lights dancing over the fields, 100 tiny beacons against the gathering dark. Hayes ruffled Lily's hair. "Bedtime, soldier," she groaned but didn't argue, pausing only to throw her arms around Ethan's waist in a wordless goodbye. As the screen door banged shut behind them, Ethan let out a long breath. The farm was quiet again, but not empty, not like before. Somewhere in the house, Lily's laughter echoed down the hallway, already leaving its mark on the walls. He turned toward the camera for the first time, the lantern light carving deep shadows into his weathered face. "Stories like this, they don't end when the credits roll," he said quietly. "They keep going in the folks who hear 'em." A beat. So tell me, who needed to hear this one today? The fireflies blurred as the camera pulled back, revealing the farmhouse glowing like a beacon against the night. Next time, I'll tell you about the teacher who stole the mayor's files.